everyone. This is another Lunch and Learn, and I'm very happy to be co-hosting this with Jeff Cody. As you guys know, I'm Z, the Senior Project Manager at Square One Engineering. And today we have, like I mentioned earlier, our Principal Quality Consultant, who will be leading us in a conversation about QMSR. Jeff comes to us with 20 years of experience in the tech quality industry, an expert in quality system, ISO 13485 lead auditor, and specializes in building, scaling, and transforming QMS through product lifecycle to deliver inspection-ready compliance products. Today, he's bringing us some expertise and some knowledge and tips and tricks to us.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for attending today. We're here to talk about a kind of a fresh new topic in quality management systems. And actually, there's been a lot of other regulatory changes with EU MDR and MDSAP as well. So this is just one of them. So if you're in quality and regulatory, you're probably pretty busy these days. But here, we want to talk about the new FDA quality management regulation, both the regulation part and the inspection part. And we're going to be, so our agenda here is the changes of that, the impacts of that change, but particularly just in 4 areas, because QMSR, and of course you include the inspection, there's a lot to talk about there, but we wanted to really focus on 4 key areas. And I'll tell you why in a few slides on why I chose those areas, but those areas are risk management, management review, purchasing, and internal audit. So once we go through the impacts, we want to spend a little time on how to prepare for inspection readiness, how to get your QMS ready. And then the actually very important part that sometimes gets forgotten is how is it sustained? It's great that your document, you went through your gap analysis, and you changed all your procedures and you're ready to go. And now you have to sustain it. And so what are some really good practices that are going to maintain compliance and make sure that you achieve compliance in your quality system from that sustained approach? So let's start with what is the QMSR. So those that have already, they're ready and they've gone through their gap analysis and they feel their quality system's up and running, you probably know the answer to this, but it's the FDA Quality Management System Regulation, and it replaces, from I believe it was 1996, the QSR, the Quality System Regulations, under 21 CFR Part 820. It went in effect February, and I think the drafts have been going around and circulating since 2024. So it's been around, and so a lot of companies have known about it for a while. One of the biggest changes, of course, is it incorporates by reference ISO 13485. And I'm going to show how the mechanics of how that's done in the next slide. It has some definition changes and a hierarchy of definitions using both FDA and legacy FDA terminology, as well as 13485 through clause 3 of ISO 9000. Okay. And then it includes conforming, if you're a combination product manufacturer and designer, it includes conforming edits to part 4. However, it doesn't impact the CGMP requirements for the combination products. QSIT is replaced by the Compliance Program Manual 7382.850, and we're going to spend some time on that. One of the biggest differences between an ISO 13485 audit with your notified body and an inspection with the FDA is that the inspection, including the parts of 13485, are enforceable under U.S. law. So the whole 483 warning letter enforcement activities has not changed, but now 13485 clauses are in scope. Okay, so I'd like to just on this one, just summarizing, the QSR to QMSR is not a document change alone. It's a documentation change and a quality culture change, requiring a higher level of risk integration, management engagement, and systems that show continual improvement in your highest safety areas. Okay, so now A little more specific on what's changed for both the QMSR and the regulation and the inspection. So taking the QMSR first, the CFR 820, it's maintained. In fact, I just to show that, this is a screenshot of the ECFR for 820, and you can see here that let me just put this laser pointer. You can see right here, 820.10 requirements for quality management system. That's essentially the ISO 13485 by reference. So you'll find the ISO clauses in there. And then the other areas under 820, control of records, and then the device labeling and packaging controls has not changed. The independent reviewer requirement has just has gone away. It's really kind of outlived its original intent in today's modern systems. One of the important parts, particularly with respect to the FDA, and it won't be new to anybody who has an ISO 13485 quality system, is this difference between outsourcing versus purchasing. And we're going to go into depth, particularly on that point, on what those differences are. And then these OFARs, right? These are the other applicable FDA requirements like medical device reporting, corrective and removals, device tracking, and device identification. Those are also part of the QMSR. So those are in the regulation. And so those will be part of any inspection, of course. So let's move to the inspection piece, just a few highlights. Records prior, and this has been a big question, records prior to February 2026 will still be reviewed. Records shielded under QSIT that are now included. So there was four document areas that record areas that were exempt, and they are no longer exempt and maybe have to be presented in an inspection. They are supplier and internal audits. They are management review reports and minutes, and they're supplier and OEM quality agreements. And so this is really particularly new. I know even for me in all of my experience, having the supplier quality agreement was not something that was shared with the FDA. But it is in alignment with 1345 and MDSAP. So that's really part of the rationale under the preamble that the FDA has responded to, that this is something that's done in 1345, and so therefore it shouldn't be too big of a burden on businesses to also include it in their inspections. A little difference on the preparation and planning, particularly looking from a risk perspective on high-risk areas. We're going to go into a slide on that in a bit, what that means and where they're going to be looking. And then there's two models that's been defined. And so there's a model 1, which is really similar to a surveillance audit, and model 2 is a full inspection of all elements. And most companies will start here, particularly if you have a new product, you haven't been inspected before, or it's been a long time. We don't, like, it's at least from what I understand, and since it only was February, we don't have a lot of history to set precedents on when the FDA is going to be choosing model 1 versus model 2. So it's probably best just to prepare for model 2 and then be ready. One thing of note is that MDSAP reports are an input into both preparing and the inspection agenda, but also the FDA can take MDSAP results and use that for a model 1 surveillance audit. So that maybe be a little bit of relief. Okay, on the inspection side, the QSIT to the QMSR. So we're going from this historical checklist, documentation-centered agenda and inspection to this risk-directed. We're taking a documentation focus of the QSIT and moving to a risk management file centric. So really the whole inspection emphasis and say philosophy has shifted. Entry points into an inspection where the FDA might want to start, really following all the risk indicators that they've done in their research to prepare for the audit. They're going to come in and know where those risk areas are from their research. Could be management review, quality metrics, complaints, supplier controls, internal audit, and then follow those into other areas, follow those risk signals into other areas like measurement, analysis, and improvement. So inspections are inspection directions are following risk signals, not documentation checklists, to ensure manufacturers are using risk management and using risk-based decision-making effectively in the quality management system. So we're going to go over the impacts, and the four that I chose are because expectations are higher than a QSR quality management system would be used to, and the emphasis is different. And also, one key thing that I mentioned earlier is that some of these records, or these records with these areas, are now can now be inspected, and so that's a big difference. So risk management, just starting with there, you have to say risk management's important when you talk about the QMSR. And if it's not just about having it in your design control process, it's about being fully integrated throughout the product lifecycle, as well as your quality management system decision making. So it's really looking at it integration horizontally and vertically of risk management. So it should really touch every part of your quality management system. Management review is the second one. And the reason why I chose this one is because, okay, records are going to be inspected. I don't know if today you want to be able to, you're ready to show your report and your meeting minutes to the FDA. If you're not, this would certainly be an area to improve on. And just in my experience working with different companies, management review, it can be kind of a passive management update, almost like an informational type meeting. And that's not going to cut it under QMSR. Not everything is fine, right? And so especially if there's risks that are reoccurring and events in place that have missed CAPA milestones, like these are going to become really important. The other one is in purchasing. Now that supplier quality agreements and supplier audits can be audited, this is going to be a big area of emphasis, and this is also in alignment with 1345, both clause 7.4 and 4.15. Okay, and then internal audit, because now the internal audit records, so all those reports and CAPAs that have been written in the past for internal audit can be inspected. So we really want to make sure that those are ready, and we're not just running, like in the internal audit, we're not just running checklist type exercises or audits. We're really looking to get into the where the core risks are to the company, and as well as the systemic risks. Okay, so those are a little bit background on why I chose these four, and we're going to go into each one of these a little bit more detail next. So risk management, the QMSR regulation, what to do, and the inspection expectations. But the little box up on the right that you see, this is in the preamble to the final release of the QMSR, the final ruling, and there's 80 pages roughly of preamble. That's really important to get familiar with, because it really just like the preamble for QSIT, right? It has a lot of information on how the FDA thinks about these things that are important to compliance. So I took this one. This is comment 19, specifically related to risk management. There's also comment 32 that's also important. But here, what the FDA says is ISO prioritizes that an effective quality system systematically identify, analyze, evaluate, control, and monitor risk through the product lifecycle to ensure that devices they manufacture are safe and effective. So here, this is something that you won't see in the QSR through this product lifecycle, right? And so the first thing that this rings a bell with is ISO 14971. So back to that question about a QSIT, QSR quality management system using, compliance to 14971 will be really important through the entire life cycle, which is particularly clause 9 in 14971, which refers to post-production risks. Okay, so a couple of bullets on the regulation. So risk is now integrated into the product lifecycle and the QMS and is expected in decision making. So how that decision making is shown is a little bit of a subtle thing, but it should have some sort of algorithm or procedure that describes when and where risk is used and how risk is used in decision making. An effective QMS will identify, analyze, evaluate, control, and monitor risk throughout the product lifecycle. So we want to continue to emphasize risk throughout the product lifecycle. So what to do in this case? Apply risk-based approach to processes within the QMS and decision-making throughout the product lifecycle, right? And really, if you go back to ISO 1345, 8.2.1, right? Excuse me, 4.1.2b, it specifically says apply a risk-based approach to the control of appropriate processes needed for the quality management system. So this is supported in 1345 and it's been around in 1345 for quite a while. So now the FDA is going to be looking to make sure that this is held true. Okay. And then of course we want to maintain, and this is like that second question I asked at the start, maintain an up-to-date risk management file. And in many companies, that's a challenge just from a resource standpoint, but also from a process standpoint, because that piece, those connections, those interfaces are really not necessarily robustly designed in the procedures. So that would certainly be another area to making sure that the risk management file is maintained in an efficient manner and an effective manner ready for inspection. That would be a real big emphasis on improvement. Inspection expectations. So really it's going to kind of come down to this difference of the ISO 13485 process audit approach versus the documentation checklist approach. And that's an ability to trace a patient risk and wherever that signal comes from, right? It could come from a medical device report. It could come from a recall. There's a lot of different areas that indicate in the public domain where these high-level risks are, that those risks and controls throughout the impacted processes. So that trace really should go everywhere throughout the quality management system. Risk and complaint trending. So a lot of times risk is or complaint trending is done for like occurrence rates, but also having those trends according to the IMD-RF codes or adverse event codes is commonly practiced and a really good idea for QMSR compliance. CAPA priorities are risk-based. Pretty sure everyone does that. And again, I just want to emphasize that risk management files are updated. Expect inspection of these. Okay. That's it for that one. Let's go to the next one, management review. So this one, there's a new preamble 55 up in the upper right in that box. And what it states is that a robust management review, as well as internal and supplier audit programs, are fundamental to the culture of quality discussed previously in this rulemaking and which the FDA expects firms to embrace. This is pretty strong language in terms of the expectations of these 4 areas. And really this comment 55 is why I chose these 4 areas for today's Lunch and Learn. Okay, so let's take a look at what this means. And we got to really keep in mind when the FDA says they expect firms to embrace, like that's something to take seriously, right? So the regulation, just a couple highlights there. Again, kind of getting back to the risk. Risk is integrated into decision-making at the management review level. Alignment in the management review level, again, alignment of priorities and resources goes to the greatest risk indicators. And although that can be done informally and from a tribal knowledge standpoint, often that's what happens, but having how that priority, how those priorities are made based on risk is probably something that the documentation should reflect, so that you're following your procedure in these decisions. Um, the other one is leadership involvement is essential for device safety and effectiveness. One of the emphasis in the in the uh, in the new inspection process is really looking for this culture of quality. And one of the things that is going to be an indicator of culture of quality that's being looked for is this leadership involvement. And so no longer is quality a department, responsibility. It's going to really be the responsibility cross-functionally and with the leadership team. All right. So what to do in this area to bring your system up to compliance? Just three kind of high-level bullets here. Um, Demonstrate improvement actions against risk signals. And so this gets back to having the documentation on how these risk signals are determined for priority, and then being able to demonstrate those improvement actions. Schedule management review based on risk. And so I've been at companies, for example, where management review is done once a year. It's going to be pretty difficult to convince an FDA inspector that once a year is sufficient based on risk to have a management review. And even more commonly, quarterly, which is more common. One could argue, depending on how fast risks change, quarterly may not be sufficient. And so being able to have somewhat of a flexible management review structure for responding in a much shorter time frame to new risks is recommended. And then, of course, ensure meeting outputs demonstrate effective controls. And so I didn't just say investigations, right, or improvement actions. I said effective controls, right? So this is the emphasis that the FDA is going to be looking at is effectiveness. So just a CAPA closes, great, but is it effective? That's going to be the important question. And this is going to be looked at and actually can be detected through reoccurring events. So wherever there's a reoccurring event, that's a real area to be looking at to see if more resources or more effort in whatever way needs to be taken to reduce those reoccurrences. Because if you have reoccurrences, and kind of by design, your original corrective action was not that effective. Inspection expectations. So management review focused on risk indicators impacting device safety and effectiveness. Executive management is actively overseeing the QMS. And this is the culture of quality comment. The sum of system management, outputs, and actions demonstrate a culture of quality. So there is no one procedure, for culture of quality, but there is this sum of how the QMS is being managed and its results and effectiveness that really kind of lead an inspector to say, we have a culture of quality and their quality management system's effective. Again, inspection ready outputs and meeting minutes. So that's going to be something that's going to be shown. Okay. So that's it for this slide. Maybe just one comment in closing, particularly like I mentioned on the reoccurring, if there is reoccurrence after a corrective action, and maybe the effectiveness check was done and everything passed, but yet you start seeing complaints for something similar, that's an indicator that maybe a preventative action should have been taken in the CAPA. And that's something that's going to be looked for, right? Because if you get reoccurrences, that means you didn't necessarily get all the corrective actions. So this focus on preventative action and when to use preventative action to prevent a future reoccurrence is something that should really be weighed using risk, right, through your FMEAs and stuff like that. We have the tools, but it should really be a conscious decision and a risk-based decision on whether or not we need to do the corrective and preventative action. Okay. Next slide, purchasing. So we're halfway through. I got two more. The QMSR regulation, again, the same comment 55 at the top, but in this case, it's it mentions supplier audit. And so we want to take a look into purchasing. Supplier audit, it's kind of roughly a kind of maybe a broad way to look at this, to make the distinction I want to make here is a supplier provides inputs, right? And that's really ISO the clause 7.4.2, right? Where really there needs to be a written agreement that the supplier notify the organization of changes, but specifications are in purchasing documentation. So maybe not like a quality agreement. Of course, most quality systems have suppliers that also have supplier quality agreements just because of their risk, and that's a good thing. But in general, from what 7.4.2 said, that at least is the minimum, right? So supplier provides these inputs. An outsource partner performs part of your regulated process. So you got to think of them as an extension of your company, whether it be your manufacturing or whether it be design or whether it be distribution. It's an extension of your company and it needs to be managed such. And so that's ISO 4.1.5 for outsource, right? It says when the organization chooses to outsource any process that affects product conformity to requirements, it shall monitor and ensure control over such processes. The control shall include a written quality agreement. So there's no, this is black and white. Quality agreements are required for outsourced partners, and the organization retains responsibility for conformance and applicable regulatory requirements. And that's something that gets stated in the quality agreement. Okay, so that's a little bit on the purchasing side. So the question, if you're going from QSIT and CFR to QMSR, then this is an area of distinction that, fortunately, to make it a little easier, it's spelled out for you in ISO 13485. So really, I guess, be compliant to 13485. To do, follow the risk-based approach for supplier selection and controls. I think that's, if you're 13485, that should be, matter of course. And then applying risk to select, monitor, control, and take improvement actions. Again, I think if you're 13485, that will be the matter of course. So a few things on the inspection that can come up. So evidence that the supplier was evaluated before approval. Again, I would say that's kind of normal 13485. The V&V activities ensure product meets requirements. 13485. Suppliers are monitored and supplier agreements and audit reports are in place. So maybe some changes there depending on your quality system. And then inspection ready documentation, including the quality agreements. And our last area to look at here is again, comment 55 for internal audit. So one way to view internal audit is to look at it from a QMS, an oversight role for QMS. So this is your chance to look for the systemic as well as the key risk areas in the quality management system and with your products. Audit planning and corrective actions are risk-based. And then again, identifying systemic quality issues. So to do, determine the audit schedule by process risk and prior audit results. We want to really focus on the critical few, where the risks are in our internal audit. We don't want this to be, again, a checklist documentation exercise. We really need to be looking for those systemic quality issues and going deep enough in the areas. I would also make sure that your risk management file or files is audited, emphasizing linkages across systems and the decision making, which may be new, particularly in the management review area. Follow the process audit approach, right? Get those traces all the way vertically, horizontally, and across your quality system to make sure that risks are being managed appropriately. Inspection expectations, detect quality problems and systemic issues. For example, if a systemic issue is found in the inspection by an FDA inspector in management review, but it's not an internal audit, an actual finding could come into your internal audit program because that's where you're supposed to detect this quality issue, or that's where you're supposed to detect the systemic issues. Audit results are escalated to CAPA. I think that's pretty normal. and responsible management. CAPA followed for effectiveness check, just emphasizing that. Most of the quality systems I see, or certainly all of them, have some sort of effectiveness check, but that becomes more important. And again, on your internal audit, those internal audit reports are going to be inspected, and they should be written up and to these expectations to be reviewed. So this is about the preparation, the transition from to QMSR from wherever you may be. So of course, it's pretty standard. They start with a gap analysis. If you're QSR, if you're more on the QSR side, definitely there's going to be a lot more work on just the documentation side, because there's definitely going to be some gaps that new procedures are going to have to be developed. For example, if you're 13485 and EU MDR and MDSAP and some of these other areas that are much more, developed, the lift is going to be a little shorter or a little easier. Maybe your documentation's okay, and you can focus on the process approach. And that's really where you're looking through traces throughout your quality system to make sure key, say, design outputs or design inputs or something are managed, controlled throughout the product lifecycle, right? In the preparation, and also I would say in your internal audit, take a look at the inspection, the new inspection manual, and look for the audit preparation inputs. This is a list that I pulled from there, and where the FDA is going to use for their inspection preparations. So it really behooves everyone to use kind of the same list to prioritize their own internal audits and where they want to spend time um, um, in developing the QMSR quality system. So high risk product intelligence area, mod databases, right? GUDID, total product lifecycle, design inputs, MDSAP reports, management commitment, sustaining and improving effectiveness, right? Labeling and UDI, that's still top 483 even through the first few months of QMSR. And when we're seeing QMSR audits, inspections, we're still seeing labeling and UDIs come up. Trending, detection of risk signals. So really making sure that your trends point to actions when required. CAPA, particularly reoccurrences, effectiveness checks, investigation quality. Root cause is always going to be important. Design changes are always an opportunity, let's say. The FDA looking at registration. Do you have class 2 or class 3 or class 1? So they're going to come in with this knowledge. And then of course they're going to look at your websites on your promotions and your claims. And so that's going to be a great entry point into where to look at in your design history file, your medical device file, for them to come in and start their inspection. And then maintaining the QMSR. So just in closing words here on the maintenance, it's a little bit of a summary of the slides that preceded it. But these are just areas of importance that I felt in the context and scope of this presentation. Risk control throughout the QMS, risk control throughout the product lifecycle, management review reports. They demonstrate improvement, effectiveness, and management commitment. Same thing for internal audits. They're demonstrating improvement in the systemic and key quality risk areas. The timeliness is still important, and the effectiveness, and particularly the effectiveness checks, are monitored for effectiveness. A real risk-based distinction in controls between suppliers and outsourced. If you're 1345, then you probably have that one in place. But keep in mind, CAPA, just like I mentioned on the UDI a moment ago, CAPA is still a top 483 issuance area in inspections. And so that's everything that I have. I really appreciate everybody's time that they've taken today to go over this topic with me.